guys, jBrereton here with another episode of Dominions 4. This one's all about creating Pretender God, because I know there's some new players after the Steam sale and they might be interested, so let's go for it. Let's pick Middle Ages, as good an age as any. Let's go for Cthis. They have an interesting selection of gods. So, what is all of this stuff? Because there is a lot at once to take in, and I can appreciate that. The thing at the top right is your physical form, which you can select from a bunch of different guys. This varies by nation, but ultimately falls into 4 different types. You have immobile guys, who are Dominion 4. This includes for Cthis, the Monument, Fountain of Blood and Oracle. For others it also includes people like the Immensul, who's like a giant tree. They are normally for Viking nations though. Okay, and then your next type is Titans, who have Dominion 3 and normally 3 paths, or 1 at Strength 3, like the Nectar of the Moon. You then have at Dominion 2, normally you have monster types, so stuff like this Worm or Sphinx. Or for African type nations, which includes Cthis, you have snakes of various kinds, so Solar Serpent with fire, Wadjet with water and nature, plus stuff like the Myrmecoelian. And then you have the generic monsters like the Earth Serpent, who is probably the best expander in the game. And all the way at the bottom you have the human type pretenders that are often called rainbow pretenders. And the reason they're called rainbow pretenders is because they have the ability to get a very, very diverse set of magic. So let's pick one of those. Let's go for Master Enchanter. And let's talk about magic in Dominions and what it means on your Pretender God. So in Dominions 4, with your blessed troops, or sacred troops really, you can gain blessing effects from your god and also from the Thrones of Ascension if you play in a normal Thrones of Ascension game. That's the default setting. How do these work? Well, what it means is when your pretender gets a certain level of magic at creation, then they are assigned certain effects. So let's go far up to 4. These are always minor effects at 4, and then often alternative steps they improve. And then at 9 you get something different. So 5 doesn't change, 6 goes +3, +4, and at 9, Flaming Weapons. Flaming Weapons is a second attack, more or less, that deals armor-piercing damage with the fire type. Let's bring that all the way down. Okay, in air you get precision, and this is one of the ones that changes every level. You get extra missile range. Now there aren't actually very many missile sacred troops in the game. Typically the ones that do have javelins, which it doesn't really affect all that much. And then if we go back up to level 9, you get air shield 80, which means you have an 80% chance of deflecting mundane missiles like, for example, arrows. But also a couple of magic spells like the spell Blade Wind and Flying Shards, but overall that's a little bit inconsistent and not to be relied on. Certainly doesn't work on things like fireballs. In water you get extra defense skill, which is one of the hardest things in Dominions to raise otherwise, so it's well worth taking if you're worried about that on your sacred troops. And then at 9 you get a special kind of quickness. There's 2 kinds helpfully in Dominions 4. The type from your blessing, which means you attack twice every other round, and then the spell type in Dominions 4 in terms of magic, which is every single round you attack twice. So one of them is basically a third better than the other. But yes, it's not that important a difference, and also the utility of it is actually at its highest early in the game. So if you take Water 9 for your sacreds, you'll do very, very well with them in the early expansion and probably your first war. Now in Earth, this has multiple effects. For your pretender, such as you get extra protection every point, which is very important. And then for your blessed troops you get reinvigoration, which increases every other point. And then you get extra protection for your blessed troops at Earth 9. Earth 9 though is overall not taken very often. You usually gain the most appreciable effect at about 6. 4 is often fine though. And then yeah, your next one is Astral. Astral, you get extra magic resistance, and then at 9 you get a thing called Twist Fate, which is it basically negates the first point of damage that you take, so regardless of its source. In Death you get a special thing called Undying, which is like effectively negative hit points. If your units are alive, like human type units, then if they end the battle in negative health, they will die. If they are undead, they'll be fine, but it is worth thinking about when you do not have regen as well on a bless or on your troops, because you can there are ways you can regenerate later. But the thing that's worth knowing is that the Undying bonus is typically larger than the nature bonus to normal health, and on certain nations, especially ones that favour undead, it gives it a little more utility as a result. Death weapons is a similar kind of deal to Fire's flaming weapons. Deals arm negating damage, but it does require that you pass a magic resistance check. As a result, it's kind of inconsistent. Nature gives you extra hit points. Once you get all the way up to 9, you get regeneration of 10% on anything blessed, doesn't matter if it's alive or not. It's the only thing in the game that can give regeneration to sacred, lifeless undead. So yes, that's worth considering. Normally this is very worthwhile, and if you only take one bless on a nation, I would say make it this one. The extra health is useful for troops and mages alike, if you have any sacred mages in your nation, and regeneration of 10% rounded up means that anything with even as low as 11 health, although nothing I don't think would be blessed to have 11 health, would gain 2 per turn. And if you get over 20, if you get 21, which is quite likely on most blessed stuff, you'll gain 3 regen per turn, which is important, because that's quite a lot more damage than, for example, poison will ever stack up, and in general, more hit points and regen will protect your mages very well against enemy magic, and allow them to act as communion slaves a lot more safely as well. Because once you get over a certain amount of fatigue in a communion, you start taking health damage. But if your guys are more healthy and they regen, then you have a really big window to operate in when it comes to that stuff. Anyway, for blood, you gain strength until 9, and at 9 you gain a special thing called Blood Vengeance, which is a morale checking kind of damage reflection. What that means is that your sacred troops, when damaged, can just hit straight back at the enemy for the exact same anywhere on the battlefield. But it does actually affect your own stuff as well, so if you start throwing around lightning bolts around troops with Blood Vengeance, sometimes your mages will cop a bit of damage. One of the most powerful combinations on quite a lot of nations is to take Blood 9 and Nature 9. For example, Lanka in the early era, or Zabalba in multiple eras, you'll gain very high HP demon troops that are sacred. Once they have even more HP and regen, they often regen 3 or 4 hit points a turn, and if they have Blood Vengeance on top of that, then enemy archers and priests who try and attack them will start just taking gigantic amounts of damage, and there isn't really very much they can do about that. Now, getting on to the other stuff for Dominion. You have many stats going on. So you have Dominion Strength itself, which you always want around 6 or 7, which is basically how much people like to believe in you. And then you have all these scales, they're called. You have Order, which is your main income scale. Just increases your income. Does a little bit of unrest reduction, but you mainly reduce unrest in Dominions by patrolling, if it ever gets to a serious point. Productivity, which is income and resources. Your resources affects the amount of troops you can produce, basically. That's all that it does, but it is something that is important, more than I think a lot of people let on. Quite a lot of people say doesn't matter. What matters in Dominions is your mages as well. If you now get to the point that your mages really matter because you didn't have enough resources to build the troops to keep you alive in your early wars, then that's all by the by. Your heat and cold is another income and supply scale. Your starting point is decided by your nation. Certain nations will be cold by default, some will be hot by default. Some will just be neutral. In fact, many human type nations will be. This is worth changing for a couple of reasons. If your nation likes to use a lot of undead troops, but it isn't cold-blooded, I would suggest taking it into cold, because a lot of undead troops have a cold aura that increases with how good your cold scale is. And in addition to that, cold means you can go across rivers. You'll see a kind of dotted, or at the very least faded, blue line between many provinces when you look around early on. When this turns to a thick blue line, you can cross them. The reverse is true for mountains, which have a kind of faded orangey line. In heat, that becomes a thick line, and you can move straight across them. For underwater nations, which are Therados in the early era, Oceania, Atlantis in middle and early era, in late they're on land, Pelagia in early and mid, Roulier in all 3 eras, and there is a new nation called Is in the middle era. You can change your heat and cold pretty much as you like, because the cold or heat in undead provinces never changes in the deep seas, and only changes by 1 point in shallower coastal waters. That means at most you're taking 5% income penalty, rather than the 15 that moving it by 3 steps would normally give you. The other thing that's worth noting with underwater nations and cold or heat, almost always run cold, is that water magic, which all of them are unsurprisingly proficient in, is much stronger in cold. So I'd say cold 3 normally over heat 3 as an underwater nation. But hey, you might find an interesting way to make it work. Now, growth and death gives you plus income, which is important. More importantly, increases your growth, which is at growth 3, basically 0.6% extra population on top every single turn, and it stacks. So growth 3 is very, very powerful. I probably wouldn't take minimal growth, it's almost never worth doing. Death is a good way to gain a lot of design points if you think you can wrap a game up early. So if a game has less players in it than normal, normal being defined as about 12, then yeah, go ahead and take death, and it opens up some really good events with luck and order specifically. But I wouldn't ever take it with misfortune. It will ruin you, in my experience. Speaking of which, fortune gives you extra events with luck. This luck plus 45 thing is just garbage, ignore it. Luck and indeed misfortune events are all based on a table where certain scales are checked for. So for example, if you have high luck, high death and high order, sometimes a prince or similar will die in your provinces. You know, you'll never have seen them, but they'll have been around, and you will gain a stupendous amount of gold and items, around 2,000 I believe, with a little random number each way. that can be really incredibly helpful. But normally, if you are going to run it, I'd run Fortune with Order for most nations, because this unlocks a lot of the best events, and Fortune and Turmoil with specific nations like Emil, M.A. Emil, L.A. Lemuria, Asphodel in M.A., Therados perhaps in EA, although I haven't played them very much, so I can't claim to be an expert on them, and certainly on L.A. Relier, all of which kill the population, so your regular gold income will be drastically falling all the time, but luck events normally do not check for population, so you can maintain a kind of pseudo income that way. And then the final scale is magic and drain. So magic gives you increased research per point, also reduces magic resistance in your own dominion, which is quite important in its own way, because it means certain spells like enslavement, for example, will be less or more likely to hit. Less likely with drain, because it'll increase the magic resistance, more likely with magic. The one thing to know about this, if you take drain and misfortune, you can lose your gems that are stuck in your treasury if you do not distribute them to your mages. If you just pass them around, which is easily done, then it won't be a problem. But if you don't want to deal with that whole micro sync where you're trying to learn dominions, and by all means I do not blame you for that, then yeah, I would go either magic and misfortune, or drain and luck, or just leave it all neutral. That's completely valid as well. It's balanced around that. And then imprisonment is just about when your god arrives. So if they're awake, they're always there. I recommend that if you are taking a monster pretender, or if you are taking a rainbow pretender specifically to do research, because you gain 2 research points for every single level in the path. So yeah, if you spend the money on this guy to boost your research up a little bit, you can get a tremendous amount done. And then dormant, I would say, is probably best for stuff like titans, who you might want to cast important spells later, but in the first year will not provide as much utility. It's also worth noting that titans, although they're kind of big, are not actually usually very well equipped for a fight, as they have typically quite low protection, or if they don't have low protection, they have high encumbrance until you forge them some gear, and you don't want to lose your pretender god. You lose a point in all your paths when they die, unless you're playing EA as the one specific nation that don't. Now this doesn't affect your bless, don't listen to anyone who says it does, but what it does affect is the magic they can cast. The only thing that affects your bless ever is your pretender god's paths of creation, and anything that you gain from a throne. So normally thrones will give you something minor, like a point of magic resistance, but sometimes it can be really amazing stuff. There is a throne, I believe, called the Throne Splendor, which gives your troops awe, which means that people have to check whether they feel okay with hitting them first, unless they're skeletons, because skeletons are really blasé about stuff. And yeah, so your conventional troops just become amazing, like instantly. But yes, so with Titans, I would not take one awake and try and hit people with it. That's not going to work. So taking them dormant, where you might have done a bit of research into construction to forge them some gear, or research into other paths where you are specifically taking them with a certain amount of magic to cast something important to your nation, that's well worth doing. And then imprisoned means they won't come out for anything up to 3 years, or actually 6 months into the 4th year, I guess, because it's a little random either way. But it gives you loads and loads of points. But it does mean that your dominion will always be lower than you would anticipate for the dominion score you get. So if you are taking, say, dominion 6 or 7, but your god isn't awake yet, whether it's dormant or imprisoned, you will have a less stable and secure way to spread it than you would maybe expect, because your pretender god is one of your main sources of producing dominion, unless you are in a nation that can blood sacrifice, at which point that's almost certainly going to be the best way you have. For certain nations like Mictlan, that is the only way you spread dominion. So for them, what you really want to do, this is getting off the topics of pretender creation slightly, but it is important, is you want to profitize your scout and use your base blood slave income to sacrifice as much as possible. Otherwise you can be taken out of the game in like 3 turns by an unlucky event that just wipes out all your dominion. So yeah, that isn't something that normally is going to affect you on most nations, but that is something that on certain nations is important. And that's the thing about dominions. You can read these nation descriptions and they'll usually give you a good idea of what to take. So for Katisk, for example, what it doesn't tell you here is that your military is crap, but what it does say is that you have kind of infantry and normal stuff, so you probably don't need to take too much productivity or sloth. If you're playing someone like Abyssia or anyone where it's listed as having heavy infantry, almost always go for productivity. If you are playing one of the monkey nations, which usually have a yellowish flag, you can normally take a couple of points into sloth and you won't be too badly damaged by it. But yeah, read the nation descriptions a little bit. I would say, if in doubt, magic you should get on your pretender is death, probably up to around 4 or 5, just to open up some more interesting mid to late game spells, unless your nation has really specific requirements. Like if it has good sacreds, almost always go for nature 9, and then see what you're going to do after that. But yeah, you'll work out what to do with your nation and your pretender relatively quickly. But I hope this was a useful guide in just getting started, because I know that's quite a intimidating prospect with dominions, and I know you have a great time. So thank you very much. I've been jBrereton, and goodbye.